My name is Jeff Mulgan from Nesta. I'm just going to say a very quick word of welcome to you all for this launch of Digital Culture 2017. That's what you all came for. As a crowd of digital creatives of all kinds. There probably is a collective noun for what you all are. I'm not quite sure what it is. Perhaps someone gets a prize at the end. Welcome to this building, which interestingly, for many, many years, was called Audit House. And you might have seen that on your Google map as you were coming here. This was the home of the government's auditors, who you may well think of as a tribe who were kind of an enemy tribe in some respects. And they might have been a bit baffled about what we're talking about this evening, but they wouldn't have been baffled by one aspect of it, which is the attempt to actually map, to get some facts of what's going on. And this study is one of quite a number of, I think, very constructive collaborations we've had as Nesta with Arts Council England over the last few years, partly trying to map the reality of uses of digital technology, also through the R&D fund, backing experimentation in the use of digital tools, either in art forms or for relating to audiences or generating revenue, and more recently with the Arts Impact Fund investing in promising projects right across the arts and across the country. Hasan, Bakshi in a moment, will say a little bit about what lies behind this exercise. In some ways it's fairly simple, a concern in this field as in some others, that whereas there is huge investment in digital in other fields from the military or espionage to retailing and banking, although there's a huge amount of creativity around technology in the arts, most organizations don't have quite the time, don't quite have the money, often don't quite have the skills to make the most of a whole series of really revolutions in technology which have flowed out of the labs in the last 10 or 20 years, whether things like CRM systems, Google Analytics, and of course in the years ahead, all sorts of new tools around AI, VR, AR, you name it. And it seemed really important to find out what was actually happening in terms of everyday uses of technology, to spot where were the gaps, where were the potential opportunities. You'll hear later about the contents of this year's survey. It's quite a complicated picture. In some ways, a picture of really growing maturity, organizations being more comfortable at using digital tools for marketing, analysis, and so on, but also in some respects a slightly troubling picture. A surprising number of arts organizations doing almost nothing for a primarily mobile world. I imagine almost everyone in this room, consumes, uses, engages with lots of things through your phone. A lot of arts organizations are scarcely started to do that. And a concerning pattern perhaps about a decline, if anything, in experimentation around digital, given that one of the lessons in so many other sectors is that organizations which play with the technology become much better at finding out how to get the best use out of digital. And I think we would argue there probably is still a bit of a gap in terms of constructive, systematic support for creative experimentation around digital. But as I said at the beginning, the bit of this exercise the auditors would approve of is that it's full of facts, and full of analysis, and full of data. And my colleague Hasan Bakshi is going to say a little bit more about what lies behind this study. He's also tomorrow morning launching a fascinating study on future labour markets, jobs and skills, which is going to provide even more evidence on why creativity is going to be even more important in schools, colleges, universities in the future. But he's not going to say anything about that now, but watch this space till tomorrow morning. Hasan, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff, and good evening, everyone. My name is Hasan Bakshi. I'm Executive Director for Creative Economy and Data Analytics here at Nesta. So I was just going to speak for a couple of minutes to give you a bit of background to this study. When we introduced digital culture back in 2013, the primary goal was actually to track the impact of the Digital R&D Fund for the Arts. Many of you will remember this program that we ran. The logic was that we were going to track over time on a consistent basis the behaviours, the engagement with digital technology of arts organisations that were supported through the fund, and we wanted to compare and contrast that with organisations that were not participating in the fund. And what did we learn? Well, we found that arts and cultural organisations in the fund went on to make more intensive use of digital technology in key areas and also enjoyed greater impacts. But in doing this exercise, we also learned that the value of a survey like the digital culture went beyond its use as an evaluation tool. In fact, it's turned out to be a resource for tracking over time digital experiences of a very wide range of cultural institutions. Now, thanks to the vision of Arts Council England, we've got Francis here today from Arts Council England, thanks to their vision and the commitment of well over 1,000 organisations we're going to hear, we've been able to run the survey again this year. Now, the last thing I wanted to say before I introduce you to Rich Ellis, who's going to be talking you through the research findings, is to comment on the timeliness of this research. Certainly, it's timely for Nesta. This year, we published our new strategy where we reaffirmed Nesta's commitment to supporting digital innovation in the arts and cultural sector. But it's also timely from the point of view of various policy reviews, including the Culture is Digital review that the DCMS is currently leading, the Museums review, just to give two examples. So it's a very timely piece of research. So with no further ado, let me hand over to Rich Ellis. Rich Ellis is the director and co-founder of MTM London. He's a long-term collaborator on this project, and many of you will know him already. He's going to speak for about half an hour or so, talk you through the main research findings, and then we've got a fantastic panel following, where my colleague Fran Sanderson will chair that, and hopefully that panel will make us, will give some meaning and help us work out what does all this survey research mean for the sector. So with that, over to you, Rich.
Thank you, Hasan. Hello, everyone. My name's Rich Ellis. I work for an organisation called MTM. We're a research and strategy consultancy. We help a mixture of commercial organisations and arts and cultural organisations understand digital change, understand their audiences, and develop plans for growing in this new and fast developing world. It's a real privilege to be here tonight to talk about this study. I love this study. It's been going on for half a decade now. It's a massive data set. It's very rare you get the opportunity to track change in a sector over 5 years. So it's a massive and really interesting data set. I'm going to take you through just the tip of the iceberg for the next 20 minutes, and then you can ask some questions if you want. You can try and shoot me down when you find the holes in my knowledge about that massive data set, and I'll hand you over to Sarah, sitting over there, who's helped me on this study this year. So, I've gone the wrong way. So, a few words on the digital culture study up front, just to set it in context. Like I say, it's been going for half a decade now. We started in 2013 and ran it again in 14, 15, and then this year. We've invited this year just over 11,000 organisations to take part. And we've had our best ever year, stonking 1,400 organisations across the arts sector responded to our survey this year. And it's a big old survey. Some of you will have filled it in. It's a monster. It takes about 30 to 40 minutes, I would say, to fill in. Lots and lots of questions. So we're really grateful to all the people who filled it in. There's also 146 organisations who filled it in for the last 4 times we've run it. So we've got this really interesting data set of organisations who've been filling it for the course of its existence so far. Anyway, let's start talking about some of the data. I want to dwell for a moment on how organisations rate the importance of digital. It's one of the foundation questions of our survey. It's really interesting to see how organisations' views of the importance of digital have changed over the years. And this year, if we track it back to 2013, there's a couple of really interesting trends. If you read from left to right on here, I hope you can see at the back. If not, I'll read some of it off to you. We asked organisations how important they thought digital technologies were to their marketing. And it hasn't really changed in 5 years. Pretty much everyone thought digital was really important to their marketing back in 2013, and that's still the case today. If you track along here, though, you'll see on the next 4 items there's been a significant fall in the proportion of organisations who think digital is important to them. And we'll talk a bit more about why later. But just to give you some of those statistics for a moment, 80% of organisations said it was important to their operations back in 2013. That's down to 76% now. 62% of organisations said it was important to their distribution and exhibition. And again, that's down. I wouldn't have predicted that in 2013. It's down from 62% to 54%. And 64% of organisations said digital was important to their creative, cultural output back in 2013. And that is also down to 56%. The most interesting statistic along here, I think, is what's happened to business models. It was a mere third of organisations said this is important or essential to our output back in 2013. And that's now above half. It's almost caught up with creative output. It's a really significant change. So let's talk a little bit about why that particular change has happened to commercial models. First of all, this year we're seeing more organisations are actually engaging in what you might call revenue-generating activities. I don't think this is going to surprise anyone. We're seeing an increase in the proportion of organisations who are selling tickets online, up from 45% in 2013 to over half now. We're seeing an increase in the number of organisations who are accepting donations online. Now, those numbers are going up. They're not going up radically, I wouldn't say. They're statistically significant, but they're not going up radically. But what is interesting here is the proportion of organisations who say as a result of that, they're experiencing a major positive impact on their lives as an organisation. We've got, 21% now, 1 in 5 who say digital is now really, really having a major impact on their revenue generation. We have a whole range of other statistics as well. Roughly the same amount say that it's important to their profitability. So, really big impact on business models. Encouragingly, we've also seen an increase in the proportion of organisations who say digital is having an impact on audience engagement. And that goes across both the range of organisations they're engaging with. So 60% of organisations say it's having a big impact on their ability to engage with new audiences, be those younger or international. 62% say it's having a major impact on their ability to engage with a larger audience in each of those sets. And 60% say it's helping them engage with those audiences in more depth, developing two-way conversations with those audiences. Here's a couple of quotes which I really liked from the survey. Paid advertising through social media platforms has allowed us to access audiences we weren't aware of. Social media is great for reaching new audiences and creating two-way conversations with those audiences. We had 1,400 replies to the survey, so we had quite a lot of qualitative lines to read back, and we saw these again and again. I think it was the most consistent line we saw in this year's feedback, and it's really encouraging. Now, this is one of my other favourite things from this year's study. Really interesting. Every year we've been asking organisations what activities they engage in. Sarah will correct me here. I think there's about 26 different activities. She's shaking her head now. Maybe it's 24. Anyway, we ask organisations about a range of different activities. Back in 2013, the average number of activities an organisation engaged in was about 9.3. And that's come down to 7.8 in 2017. So organisations, on average, are engaging in fewer digital activities. Maybe that's a concentration of effort around what works now as the sector matures. Maybe it's a reflection of austerity as organisations have less money to spend and are having to focus their activity. Let's talk about what activities are less common as a result, just for a moment. We're seeing 7 activities that are now less common. Maintaining a blog, posting video and audio content. I would not have expected that. We'll come to social in a minute, but I wonder whether organisations are misinterpreting our question there and are thinking about posting video and audio to podcasts and to websites. And that's gone down, whereas posting to, say, YouTube has gone up. I'm less sure about that data point. email marketing's gone down, search engine optimization's gone down. But for me, the most important data points, and I'll read some of these out to you, are around the research and development activities we asked about. So we asked organizations, do you partner with other arts organizations on projects with a digital component? 28% said they did that. We asked organizations, do you engage in experimentation and take risks with digital technology? A third said yes in 2013. That's down to 30% this year. Again, is that about austerity? Is that about a lack of resources? Is it about people losing faith with R&D? For me, this is a big question. It's one of the big questions in this survey. And we'll return to these experimenters later because they see really positive impacts. So it feels like a good thing from our study. But nonetheless, fewer are doing it. At the same time, use of social media has increased. Back in 2013, Facebook was already ubiquitous. You see it on the far left here. 90% of organizations back then and 92% now say, we use Facebook. The big mover is Instagram, up from, is it 12%? Yeah, 12% back in 2013 to nearly half of organizations now. So social media was already fairly ubiquitous, but there's more of it now. And I suspect, although this is a suspicion, I think we need more qualitative research to prove this. I suspect organizations are using it more. It's not just they're using more platforms or anything like that, it's they're spending more time using them. And we get hints of that from the fact that organizations are consistently telling us in this study, we use paid social media now, we use paid advertising through social media. Jeff mentioned the mobile internet at the start. And we've now got over 2/3 of organizations who now have a mobile-enabled website. I don't know if is that a good thing, or is that a really, really poor statistic? 60% of the UK's online time is now spent online. Is it really acceptable for the sector to have, what, my maths will let me down now, 31% of organizations who do not have a mobile-enabled website? But at least it's up from where we were back in 2013. I think the other really interesting statistic here, alongside the R&D issues, is what happens to data-led activities, which I would really have hoped would have gone up more than it has. But in fact, the 7 data-led activities we asked organizations about have basically remained stable since 2013. And 2 data activities are actually less common. Fewer organizations use audience data to send out newsletters now. Maybe that's a function of social media. Maybe that's nothing to worry about. But fewer organizations are using audience data to inform the process of developing new commercial products or services. Again, I think it would be great if that statistic was moving in the opposite direction, and I think it's an interesting consideration for policymakers and funding bodies and arts and cultural organizations themselves, why that's the case and what maybe we can do about it. We have a lot of data about how this change is distributed across the sector. We haven't got time to go into it now, but we have got fact sheets on each art form, and we have got a whole range of data in the main report on how this is distributed geographically and also by org size. But just to give you a flavour, on the far left here, 70% of arts and cultural orgs say they experience a positive impact from digital. If we read across, that goes up to 79% of NPOs. I think you'd expect that, more funding in general, more stable funding. And then you see there's real changes across art forms. Visual arts organisations, 86% of them say they experience a major positive impact. And heritage organisations, the fewest of those, experience a positive impact at 62%. Again, perhaps just a feature of the makeup of those organisations rather than anything inherent in that part of the sector. Large organisations experience more impact, 80%, compared to 67% of small organisations. And we could go on. There's a whole set of regional trends as well. London organisations tend to experience more positive impact, but some other regions are catching up over the last 5 years. Finally, we've talked about the change, but let's talk for a moment about the barriers to that change, which again is a really key part of this survey and throws up some really interesting data. I'm sorry this is a little bit slow. I'll read it's a bit small. I'll read some of it out to you. We asked organisations, how many of you think a lack of in-house staff time is a barrier? And 68% said that it was a huge barrier in 2013, and 68% say it's a barrier now. That hasn't moved. We've seen slight declines elsewhere in lack of funding to allocate to digital, which feels encouraging. Fewer organisations think lack of funding is a barrier now. Although it's only marginally down to 62% of organisations. And then down the rest of this chart, it's largely the same. Lack of in-house skills and knowledge, about a third of organisations think that's a barrier. Similarly, a third of organisations think that limited IT systems or networks is a barrier. A third of organisations say that no senior manager with a digital remit is a barrier. I think there's an interesting trend to explore there about whether you want one senior manager with a digital remit or whether it should be spread across the whole management team. I think it's a trend we've seen across other sectors in the last few years, the end of the chief digital officer. And I think potentially that's something that we're seeing across the arts and culture sector as well. And I'll come on to that briefly in a moment. So the same kind of barriers, pretty much the same, but maybe an encouraging fall in the number of organisations who think the funding's a barrier. We also asked about skills, the chief enabler of change. And again, the skills areas are actually fairly consistent over the last 5 years. We have not seen a lot of change. Just over 2/3 of organisations think they're well enabled for digital marketing. Reading down this, half of organisations think that they're well served for multimedia and web design skills. But if we look down to the bottom, 39% of organisations think they're well served for research and development, and only a third of organisations think they're well served for data analysis, and just under a third for database management and CRM, which feel like, again, huge issues related to what we were talking about earlier in terms of the proportion of organisations who are engaging in data-led activities to understand audiences better. So some pointers there, again, for policy development, I think. Okay, we're right at the end now. We've got 4 minutes left, yeah? Okay. We've talked about the sector as a whole now. We also asked some questions that allowed us to isolate certain groups, not so much by their size or their region, but by characteristics. And the first group we just wanted to share a bit of insight with you on was organisations who self-declared as experimenters. There's about 30% of those organisations who claim they experiment or take risks with digital. And there's some interesting differences between them and the sector average. So, first of all, I don't think anyone will be surprised by this. The experimenters do a wider range of digital activities. On average, 11.3 activities per organisation compared to 7.8 for the sector as a whole. So they're more active. This is one of my 2 favourite data points in the whole study, I think, this year. When these organisations report on where they feel impact, there's no real change on marketing. I haven't put marketing up here. It's about the same as the sector average. There's actually not a lot of change on business models. But when you look at the proportion who say it's having a big impact on their creative output, then it goes from just under half to 77%. So the experimenters, it seems, are experimenting with their creative and cultural output and seeing real impact there. And that feels intuitively right to me, and I'm sure to lots of you when you look out across the sector and see some of the great stuff that's going on, even if it's not consistent across the sector. Similarly, on the impact on distribution and exhibition, just 36% of organisations overall say digital has a big impact on their distribution and exhibition. That's up to 69% for the experimenters. So again, the creative output and then the distribution and exhibition of that creative output is where these experimenters are seeing the impact. There's such big changes for this cohort, and again, really point towards why experimentation is so important. And then impact on business models and operations, up a little bit, but not nearly as significant as them, from 68% to 84% overall. We also looked at organisations experiencing less impact from digital. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, they do fewer activities. They do fewer complex activities, so only 10% do simulcast or live streaming, compared to 19% of organisations overall. So they're less active in some of the complex areas. I think this is interesting. Far fewer have a senior manager who's knowledgeable about digital, which suggests, it could suggest just that these are organisations who don't need that senior manager for digital because digital is not important to them inherently. Or it could mean that organisations who don't have that expertise at a senior level are missing out on all the positive impacts that we're seeing for other organisations. And on a related note, these organisations tend to have their digital expertise, such as it is, concentrated in one part of their organisation. They say, whereas a third of the sector overall say that their digital expertise is distributed across the organisation, of these lower impact organisations, 21% say it's distributed across the organisation. For most, it's just isolated in one or two places, maybe someone who puts their website together. So, that's kind of it. Really interesting story across the sector. On the positive side, benefits widely felt. 70% of organisations feel a positive impact. Half of organisations have seen an increase in the importance of digital to their business models. More organisations are doing activities related to their business models and revenue generation. And more are experiencing impact across their audience engagement. And some important caveats to that story. We're seeing a refocusing of activities, organisations doing fewer activities overall, but they're still benefiting to roughly the same degree, and in some cases to more, especially with business models, from those few activities. So it's potentially a positive refocusing. But fewer organisations are experimenting with digital, and most data-led activities have fallen. And still a quarter of the whole sector who say they don't really experience much impact from digital. And I think, again, a policy question going forward is how do we address that issue with those low-impact organisations? So that's that for now. Thank you very much. Does anyone... Thank you. So does anyone have any questions?
Hello, my name is Sabine McNeil. My company is 3D Metrics, and I'm number 2 on the list. For me, digital is information plus communication. And you don't seem to have separated that in terms of activity. It was, and engagement, if you like, is just about. But in my view, as an old computer granny, there's a big difference between a computer and a tablet and a phone. And so there are different applications, and if you like, horses for courses. I wonder whether in your next 5 years you might differentiate a little.
You mean differentiate in terms
uses of digital for computing versus digital for communication. Information processing is computing, whereas communication is, well, we know what that is, I suppose.
Yeah, understood.
But because I see the future in data science, and that was amazingly low.
Well, maybe that's a failure in my presentation then, because that's certainly the intention that we've woven that into the survey. And in the main report, you'll see plenty of that. We've looked both at the marketing communications and audience engagement side of digital activity and impact, and we've seen positive impacts there. But we've also looked inside to how organisations operate and to the IT and systems, and seen where the barriers are there. And the barriers are still pretty much as high as they were back in 2013, which is a big issue. And the data issues I was talking about in particular, I think are closely related to what you say, if I've understood them. We're talking about organisations here who will enable well, they will understand their audiences better and they will engage with their audiences better if they develop the CRM systems and the data analysis capabilities to work with those audiences on a more two-way and personalised level. And one of the things I think is more disappointing about this sort of trend over the last 5 years is that it's not really moved. In fact, in some ways, their use of data has gone down. And I know if I was a policymaker, and I'm not, you know, I would be looking more and more at that area. And I know there's plenty of people in this room who've been doing that already.
Thank you.
Jane Ellis from BBC. Very interesting. Just one question. Do you have an overlay of what audiences expect? Because you've outlined some fantastic work since 2013 based on the sector. But I just wonder whether you have any sense in the report of how this matches with audience expectations and whether audience expectations are driving any of the figures that you've shown us or not, or is that beyond the remit of what you can do?
So it's a great question, and it's fundamentally beyond the scope of this report, because this report is a business-to-business report. We did think about asking organisations what they thought their audiences want, but half of our organisation is a consumer insight organisation. That's what we do for a living. It's a very bad way of finding out what audiences want. So we thought it was not a great use of limited time in the survey. We've done other projects. I'm sure other people in this room have done lots as well, looking at what audiences want, you know, and you know, around things like live to digital, simulcasting, streaming, use of social media, the fact that audiences don't want to go to websites anymore, they want to engage with organisations through social media. And some of those, I think, if you do a very careful read across, you know, show that the sector might be heading in the right direction with social. But yeah, there's nothing in this report that does that directly.
So I'm over here. Thanks for research. It's John Denton from Gallant Media Ventures. And just your impact on business models or digital underpinning business models. I just wonder what the definition of that business model was. Was it just purely focused on generating revenue, or was it also about taking cost out? Or what was the definition of, you know, how would digital impact your business model? Trying to understand how people interpret that.
Yeah. So we have a range of areas that we ask about. Again, I think it's around about 20. Sarah will correct me if I've got that number slightly wrong. I think it's 21, 22 different areas, impact areas. And the business model ones include profitability and revenue. And they include, they include profitability and revenue. Is there anything else they include? That's an unfair question to you. I think they're the main areas. We separately ask about operations.
Shared.
Start again. Thank you. Rich, thanks very much for that. William Wong, I'm from London Only. We are an Instagram community platform, so we connect London with the world. In fact, we're going from virtual to offline. I've just hired 2 community managers to really develop our offline presence in London and UK. The question really is, I've been on Instagram personally for 4 years. I'm already a late adopter. I've been in this job for 2 years, so metrics and benchmarking is part of my life. Over the last 6 months particularly, I've noticed a significant slowdown on Instagram. Engagement is just falling across the board. So for anyone who says they still claim Instagram is the fastest growing social media platform, I really want to challenge the facts. I just want to get your view, because I really fear the art sector is rapidly catching up, as I saw from your bar chart, on a sunset platform. The next big thing will come along. I don't think people will actually stop sharing images or documenting visual memories. It's just until the next sexy thing comes along, Instagram is just becoming so yesterday.
So, first of all, I mean, it's an interesting point. The data set here is now about 6 months old. So it would not capture a change that recent. It's capturing changes that maybe organisations are feeling in the last 12 to 18 months. In terms of other projects we've done, I've seen a really mixed story there. We're doing a big project right now for someone who might own Instagram or might be a big competitor of someone who owns Instagram, looking at advertising on Instagram. And that is still growing very strongly internationally, very strongly in the US, very strongly across Asia Pacific, less strongly in the UK, which maybe reflects what you're saying. And I think it's also a trend you see elsewhere in social, isn't it? Snapchat has had a really strong couple of years, but I think there's a slow off there as well, certainly in advertising. And advertising is always this great proxy for consumer usage. So yeah, I mean, that feels consistent with some of our other projects, but you wouldn't capture that in this data set. But we'd see it next year. No. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
Hi, I'm Fran Sanderson. I'm a director in the Arts, Culture and Creative Economy team here at Nesta. We're delighted to have a really exciting panel for you today. So if I can bring up Francis, Kati, Katie and Anna and ask them to each introduce themselves and just give a quick response, their individual response to the findings of the report. Sorry, Francis. We've got technical problems.
Hi, I'm Francis Ronakers. I'm the Executive Director of Enterprise Innovation at the Arts Council. This is a new role at the Arts Council. I've been in that role for about 8 months now. But I've been at the Arts Council for 17 years, so I'm of an age also to say that I'm very much not a digital native. And it's interesting the comment about Audit House or whatever this was called. I started in audit. That's where I started at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And when I did audit, we did it with a pencil on paper. So that shows the change. Just looking at the report, first thing to say is the Arts Council really values this report. We value the quality of it, and that particularly comes from MTM and Nesta. The arts is short of quality data in a number of areas, so it's great to have something really good in this area. The second thing we value about it is its longitudinal nature. So the fact that there's a permanent sample of people who've answered it all three rounds, if you like. And the third thing I'd say about the report is it really influences us. So the thing about MPOs having to have a digital strategy and plan this time is a direct result of the results of the 2015 survey. And a recognition that this was something that we had to, as the development agency, attempt to help the sector with. So, but by encouraging our larger organisations, by putting a term and condition in that they have to have it. And those plans will be coming in from September-ish onwards, I think, from September onwards. And they'll be using material that MTM have produced for us. And so that what you can see there is the relationship between good quality data driving us to consider how to help the sector. So we're very positive about the report and the process, if you like, that's gone on for 3 rounds. Just turning to things that, are kind of new to this, but if I read those figures correctly, I think it said that 52% of organisations don't sell tickets online. Have I got that right? I think that's what it said. I find that extraordinary. I can't think of a ticket that I've bought in the last 5 years, I don't know, whatever, which I haven't bought online. Who are these people who aren't selling tickets online? Where can I go and do a sort of analogue ticket buy somewhere? I am surprised at that. If it is so, then clearly there's work to be done. Similarly, some of the stuff around giving, low figures there. People give online. I'm not aware of people giving to arts organisations in different ways. So for me, there's some really kind of interesting stuff that I have to assume is true, and therefore suggest we've got a lot still to do. So I think just to say we welcome the report. It's very valuable to us. There's still a lot to be done. Thank you.
Can you pass that?
Thanks. I'm Carty Price, Head of Digital Media and Publishing at the Victoria and Albert Museum. It was a fascinating report. It was great to read through. There's some really surprising things in there. There's the reassuring fact that those of us who are brave enough to experiment get the reward for doing so. I was really surprised, though, that the proportions of those seeing digital as something more than just a marketing activity was declining, and it feels retrogressive. Yes, we all accept it's vital to how we do our marketing and communications activity, but things like archiving and digitization and the act of creating content and experience, that to me is staggering. It's kind of what we do at the V&A. We've got 2.3 million objects. They are all still being digitized and will take a while to do the lot of them. We've got an amazing exhibition on at the moment. It's the party's tonight, actually. I'm missing out on that. But the opera exhibition is all about an immersive experience that uses technology to drive this amazing audio-visual experience. So that was surprising. And then I think, yes, it's reassuring that lots of us are using online to drive ticketing sales. I think lots of us are experimenting with variable and dynamic pricing, and I think it's probably incumbent on those of us who have done those sorts of experiments to share our knowledge with those who perhaps are less brave. I think that it was surprising also to hear that people are less into e-marketing and blogging. I know they're old school, but they're really, really powerful. They work. And the fact that on the one hand we're investing in data and CRM systems, and yet we're not really using that so effectively in e-marketing. So there seems to be a contradiction there for me. The fact that we're doing less but achieving the same impact is reassuring. It points to us all being perhaps a bit savvier. Perhaps we're looking more at the ROI before we enter into things. So that's all reassuring. But I think the most saddening thing to read was about this. Yes, there's a rise to 69% of us having mobile optimized sites, but that is not good enough. Google changed their algorithm so that it actively punishes you if you don't have a mobile optimized site. It feels like people maybe are getting distracted by doing exciting experiments rather than getting the basics right. It's basically an act of kamikaze SEO to not mobile optimize your site. So that to me was quite shocking. If people could do one thing, make it mobile.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Katie Moffat. I'm Head of Digital at the Audience Agency. So we're a not-for-profit research and consultancy, and we work with arts and culture, museums, heritage organisations. So we work and we see kind of the whole gamut of sizes of organisations, art forms, and kind of, work on a daily basis in terms of the challenges and the opportunities that kind of digital represents. But in terms of the report, I think it's a really, really interesting report, and it is fantastic to get this kind of longitudinal data, which is hard, it's very hard, if not impossible, to get elsewhere. So I think there was some, as Kat is saying, there's some really interesting and positive things, and then some less positive things. For me, the kind of point about data and the use of data for insight is, sadly, it's not really a surprise to me, but it is something that I think as a sector we really need to try and get a handle on. I think there is just, as to why that's the case, it's, I'm sure it's one for discussion and questions. I think there are a number of reasons why that might be, but it's certainly the case that as a sector, our sort of use of data in terms of using it for insights and then actionable insights is probably not as good as it should be generally. And I think the points about experimentation are really interesting. I wonder, actually, just in terms of what experimentation means to people, whether it would be different if you were to say to someone like the V&A, do you think you experiment, as to a much smaller organisation? And also, I think, if you go back a few years and you say to people, are you experimenting with digital, even kind of setting up an Instagram account might have meant to them experimentation, whereas now if you ask them, it might mean that they think VR, and I couldn't do VR. So there's something in there. But in terms of innovation generally, I think you know, again, that's a really interesting part of the report and something that would be great to explore further, particularly because I think this notion of people who are experimenting and are innovating are getting those rewards. And I think one of the issues that we have as a sector is that there are organisations who struggle to do that for reasons that Richard outlined, you know, finance, etc. And I think that one of the issues is to do with kind of project-based funding. Not that there's anything wrong with project-based funding, but the problem is it can create kind of digital silos where people get funded, if you think about, you know, archives or museums with collections, to kind of create a thing and put it online or kind of do a project, but then there's not a kind of ongoing support for that. So that's one thing. And then just a couple of other really small bits. I was really also surprised about the SEO and email marketing point. I'm kind of gobsmacked by that because it's just so critical. And then also there was I think a note about the fact that organisations are doing less in terms of educational resources online. I was kind of surprised by that because in terms of reaching schools and younger people, I think that's a real opportunity. So I kind of that was just a point of interest as well.
I'm Anna Lowe. I'm one of the co-founders and director of partnerships of Marta Phi. So Marta Phi is a mobile application that's been called Shazam and Spotify for art. So essentially you hold up your phone to an artwork and it will instantly recognize it, give you the information about the artwork, and then you can save your favorites into a personal collection. And we work across galleries as a platform. So we're live at 30 museums like the National Gallery, the RA, etc. I think some of the key things that I highlighted as similar things to you. The first one would be data again. I think, it's kind of obvious now that as we move forward, AI, everything we're doing is being shaped by algorithms, whether it's shopping or politics, for better or worse. So we can't really let our arts audiences just go and watch Netflix or listen to Spotify when they could be re-engaged in visiting arts venues. I think we need to act more to integrate the data analytics across museums and sharing audiences collaboratively. The second point I really picked up was about again, what is innovation and what can we class as innovation? So obviously for some organizations, introducing ticketing, introducing donations is a great thing, live streaming, and we've seen that rise. But I think the barriers to entry have clearly come down. It's not really an innovative thing to be doing anymore, I don't think. I think it's a part of everyone's job description to kind of look for services that make your job more efficient. So I wouldn't really see that as innovation. And I think the R&D piece is still clearly, there's a gap that isn't being filled. And the main barriers were listed as kind of staff time, resources, again, project-based funding. It's hard to kind of build that into the organization. But I think there is an opportunity to work with startups like ourselves and other organizations. And I think it said somewhere like only 22% of organizations said they work with technology providers. So if you haven't got in-house, skills, resources, funding, there is an opportunity to work with, so many amazing startups that I know who are doing VR, AR, and would love to, work on projects with museums. And I think that is a big opportunity there to use that more.
Okay, so I called this panel, How Can Arts and Cultural Organisations Use the Digital Revolution to Their Advantage? And I want to kind of be a bit controversial and say, do you think that arts and cultural organisations in the sector in general are actually participating in the digital revolution on the basis of this report and your own experience? That's a loaded question, isn't it? Let's start with you this time, Anna.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think there's still a lot of work to do. I think the digital revolution for me is about data. I really think that data is like, the new oil. That's where the value is. It's about learning what your audiences want and then being able to deliver that. And the fact that data isn't being used to create products and services blows my mind. I mean, that's just basic user design. So, yeah.
I think there is. I mean, this is nothing particularly new to say this. I think everybody probably knows this who works in the arts and culture sector. But in terms of the material that's produced, the interesting content, it's amazing. But somehow, for some reason, that doesn't always translate into the digital space. And I do think that, sadly, kind of in a prosaic way, some of that is down to things like budget. You know, you look at IKEA as an example. They have an innovation department that has 150 people in it. You know, you have L'Oreal, who have a team of 500 doing social media, say. Now, I know, you know, in a way you could kind of say, well, there's no point saying that because we can't get to that point. But I do think there is... The problem is always going to come back to, you can have lots of amazing ideas, but if you can't kind of realise them, it's quite tricky. So I think we're definitely a lot further on than we were 5 years ago, definitely. But I'm not sure we're where we could be, and I would absolutely agree about the data side of things.
Should we be leading the digital revolution? I'm not sure that we should. Depending on how we're funded, you know, the taxpayer might prefer for us not to be doing that and just to be doing a good job with what we have. We actively decide not to be a leader in certain areas at the V&A because we look and analyse what that investment might entail. But should we be innovative? Yes, absolutely. We're all tasked with that awful phrase of doing more with less. And that does mean being innovative and taking risk. The nature of that risk is an interesting one, whether it's financial risk and who pays ultimately is an interesting question. But yes, we absolutely have to be innovative, but that doesn't mean we have to be at the forefront of leading a digital revolution in our sector.
Thanks. Francis?
Well, I think it's spotty. That's the thing. So we talk a lot of the time as if sort of all arts and cultural organisations are similar. And we're guilty of that. We're national portfolio organisations, because the only thing that binds them together is their organisations. That they're not really a portfolio at all. They're very, very different in size, different in scale. So I think there are people who are absolutely at the cutting edge, particularly in some of the creation side. So some of the organisations we fund, Watershed and things like that, are absolutely, I think, at a kind of cutting edge. I think when it comes to more like the back office and data and things, no. I think, you know, almost every other sector possibly is better than us, whether that's banks, health, retail, whatever. So I think in that area we're a bit behind.
I think that's one of the things I was looking for, you know, to what extent can we talk about the sector here? And I think we've sort of highlighted one of the issues there, which is just a knowledge gap, really. So, for example, to use your outsourcing point, is it that people just simply don't know who to ask to provide these services for them? They don't know what services they need, perhaps around data. Is there something in the decision-making structures within organisations to say, you know, who do we need to ask to make sure that we take this decision to outsource this particular service that we think we might need? Do you think that's something that's particular to our sector, and might that be a reason that the adoption is being slower?
One of the issues, I think, is about a change of generational leadership. And in the commercial profit sector, those things happen. Leaders that aren't being successful get replaced, brutally sometimes. And in our world, typically not for profit, that tends not to happen. So I think one of the impediments is about the speed of leadership change. And one of the things I'd be interested in, I didn't see anything in the report about boards and what influence they have on the take-up of digital. No, not all organisations, arts and culture, are charities, but a significant number are. And whether actually boards in particular in our world are very weak in this area. I don't think the board of a bank can afford to be weak in the digital area, whereas I think in our world they can. So for me, that's one of the biggest things, is whether the relative slowness of change of leadership is something that needs to change. Because I think, you know, younger people will instinctively be digital.
I agree with Anna that there's loads of amazing companies out there that we could all collaborate with, but I mean, we're in the fortunate position of being approached all the time and also having a really talented in-house team. How I often find that the approaches we get are somehow offering an answer, but we need to all be better equipped to understand what the question is that those are answering. And I think asking the right questions is something we could all be better equipped to do, and putting audience at the heart of those questions that we need to ask.
I actually wanted to just to kind of move on to more specific questions, not to do you guys out of an answer. Feel free to shoehorn it in. Katie, I wanted to ask, I read a blog of yours about South by Southwest and thinking about digital tribalism and how that's evolving. Obviously, digital is a new thing. We're in different phases. Another issue might be that people are interpreting the questions, not to undermine our longitudinal data, but people are interpreting the questions, as to John's point about business models earlier, in a different way as these things evolve. You know, we've got 60% of organisations saying that they're reaching new audiences through digital. Is that something we're going to continue to be able to do as our kind of digital circuits close?
So I think that's kind of a huge question, but an interesting one. Yeah, that was an article for the Next Web that I wrote, which actually rather depressingly was in March 2016, and it was to do with data analysis around the Trump and Clinton campaigns and to do with what supporters of both of those campaigns saw in terms of their digital media worlds. And it's no surprise. I mean, since then, obviously, we've had Brexit and we've had we've had Trump. We still have Trump, and I think everyone's now sort of as a result of that more familiar with the kind of filter bubble notion, which is a huge problem. I think, though, it's less of a problem for arts organisations in that, you know, this sounds like such a sort of trite thing to say, but at the end of the day, if your content is interesting enough, it will cut through. And of course, on top of that, you have the kind of practical ways of reaching new audiences, like Facebook advertising. But I think one of the I think there was an interesting qualitative comment in the report about kind of you know, how social media was perhaps, I can't remember the exact details of it, but it was, you know, it's quite difficult to reach people on social media now because there's, you know, there's lots going on and people are looking at lots of different things. And then there was another comment relating to sort of live streaming about how, oh, you know, we kind of tried it, but nobody, you know, it didn't really work. And, you know, not to sort of downplay how, you know, how challenging it is to get people's attention, to reach new audiences. The reality of it is I do think sometimes as marketeers, we forget that, you know, the competition is huge and your stuff has to be good. And yes, people are watching Netflix instead of your live stream. And it's harsh, but it's kind of also true. So I think it's about really understanding you know, what it is that those audiences want, not necessarily what it is that you have to say, and then, you know, getting much better at the kind of practical side of, or using tools in a practical way to reach new audiences. So, you know, things like paid advertising.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Francis.
I agree with that totally. I mean, digital is not a panacea for a product that isn't good enough. And particularly with young people, you know, they're very quick to decide a product isn't good enough. So I don't think we should see digital as something that will somehow mask that. It is brutal, but we're all aware of that now.
Yeah, of course.
Just a quick point about new audiences being really, really important, but acquisition is much more expensive than retention. And I think that's why some of the data is a little bit depressing, because if we're not using data, we're not using the CRM systems we have and the insights we could glean from data analytics in the way that would be much more powerful. We're not focusing our attention on sort of retaining the people we do have, keeping them on board.
Anna, can I ask you a couple of questions? So you're obviously building partnerships with organisations. Is it always obvious to you who you should start to speak to in an organisation? And then another question about Smartify. Obviously, you are getting a lot of data with your, you know, the app the platform gives you access to an awful lot of really interesting data with valuable insights. Do you find that organisations are interested in that in the first instance, or what is it that drives their interest in Smartify?
Yeah, so to the first question, no, it's really hard to know to speak to in a museum. It can be, education, marketing, accessibility, pretty much anyone. So as long as you kind of have a champion who's kind of like, this is great, and let's kind of move it forward, then that's all you need, and that can come from any department, I think, because digital is something that crosses every department, or should be. And to your second question, analytics is really important to the museums who partner with us. So, for example, we went live at the National Gallery last week, And since then, about 4,000 people have used the app, and we know what works they're scanning, what their favorite works, who they are, where they're coming from. So that's information that they can use to help engage those audiences, to kind of return again and to say, okay, you've scanned this work, here's a blog, here's a podcast, and basically connect that digital world that exists to the actual physical experience of visiting. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. And yeah, we're absolutely, really interested in the analytics.
Okay. Do you think that, I'm actually thinking about data now and thinking about GDPR and whether arts organisations are going to be ready for this, and things that, what could be these huge hurdles that suddenly are going to block adoption of digital in a capacity-constrained sector?
Who'd like to take GDPR?
Well, firstly, GDPR, it seems to be shifting a lot, and exactly what's incumbent on us as a national museum seems to be shifting slightly compared to other types of organisations. So firstly, I'd say I don't think there's absolute clarity on what we need to do as organisations and the various different types of organisation that's represented in this room. But I think anyone who has engaged with a CRM programme recently hopefully should be in a good position to know that their data's in good stead. They captured that data in the correct way. But yes, lots of us are facing still little pockets of data that we need to sort out, and the deadline's looming, and people mention rather scary amounts of money that we might be targeted with. So we have to take it very seriously, but I think it still feels to be evolving a lot.
Francis, do you want to answer that? Sorry to put you on the spot from the Arts Council perspective.
No, I mean, I'd agree with what you said. And interesting, I went to a presentation at O2 the other day, the telephone company, and there was a range of charities in the room, largely not arts charities, actually social enterprises in other areas. And their take on it was actually it was an opportunity as much as a threat, because it allowed you an opportunity to re-engage with people. Yes, there was a compliance issue to it, but actually if you did it sympathetically and well, it was a good chance to talk to people and to get in touch with them and say, is it okay to have your data and so forth. And actually they were perhaps naturally, as people who use a lot of anonymized data, were seeing it as a plus point, actually, which I thought was an interesting take on it.
Yeah. That's the first I've heard of GDPR as an opportunity, so thank you for putting that positive spin on things. What was my next question? Kati, I wanted to go back to you actually and see if you're obviously with a big and very commercially successful arts organisation now. In the past, you've been in purely commercial organisations. Do you see the difference there that perhaps Jeff was referencing and Rich referenced a little bit as well in the kind of what is the imperative driving digital and digital adoption in organisations?
I think, it's sort of almost Janus-headed. On the one side, absolutely, there's a huge commercial imperative. Our funding is dwindling. We need to be much more entrepreneurial and commercial about how we make money and reinvest that money. But on the other hand, we are a publicly funded body who protects the nation's art and design collections. So we really need to share our knowledge, and we need to provide access to our collections. So everything we do in digital and social, yes, there is a commercial imperative, but there's also one of sharing what we have, whether that's the knowledge or the collections themselves. So we always have to straddle the two, and it is sometimes a balancing act, but I think on the whole we managed to do it successfully. But yes, sometimes there are tensions.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone else have anything to say on that one? Okay. Do we want to open it up to the floor for questions? Were there any questions for the panel from the floor?
It was really, really fascinating to hear and watch the various facets of digital culture, beautifully selected panel. I wonder whether, especially between you, Francis, and Katie, you have a kind of a digital policy. And I was intrigued by your statement that acquisition is more expensive than retention. So would there be space for a digital room somewhere on a permanent basis with regularly changing exhibitions to attract some digital retention? And would the Arts Council fund something like this? Because They're just, I mean, Smartify it's brilliant as an application, but it's just one of the ways in being digitally creative.
I don't think we do. I don't think we do sort of grant decisions on the hoof, kind of public meetings. So I'll have to take the fifth on that one. As to having a policy on whether people should have digital rooms or something like that, no, I don't think we probably would do that. What we've said is, and we're beginning to encourage organisations, is to have a digital strategy and policy. And there's a whole raft of advice and guidance on what that will look like. It'll be very different for a V&A-sized organisation to a two-person publishing company working out of somebody's front room, but it will be appropriate to them. But I don't think it's for us to sort of impose a way of doing it on the sector, not least because we fund a very broad church. And so, from contemporary dance through literature and theatre, dance and so forth. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all for that solution. And indeed, echoing a point made earlier, we need to ask the audiences what they want, not just produce things that the kind of we think might be a good idea. They will not consume the things they don't want.
That actually did bring me to another question about sector support organisations and what Arts Council's role is there sort of specifically in digital.
Well, we have a sector support organisation on the panel here. Well, first of all, they're new. So there are no sector support organisations yet. There will be from the 1st of April. It's a new thing we introduced in this particular investment round. Obviously, many of those companies that are going to be sector support organisations were funded by us, but they were funded differently and with different funding agreements. I think the first thing to say about them is we want to work with them closely. I'm tempted to use the word aggressively, but that's not quite the right word, but firmly or whatever. So whilst they are part of the national portfolio, I certainly see it as a slightly different relationship, a close relationship where they're providing an incredibly valuable service, but we'll want to talk to them about how they do that and so forth. So they are going to be, hopefully, the kind of future of support for the sector. They're a broad range of organisations in there. Some, will be closer relationships than others. I think particularly the audience agencies, the organisations associated with philanthropy, this kind of thing, will have a very close relationship with indeed.
So they're really kind of strategic partnerships.
Absolutely, and I mean, the banding of and the concept of SSOs has been coming over a while. It was first suggested in 2006, I think, and so it's taken us a while to get there. But I think it's probably the right way forward to bring them into the portfolio, to make them part of that thing. But the relationship will be different, I think, to a typical theatre. It won't be that sort of relationship.
Yes, one of the things I would say is that obviously it's fantastic to be an SSO organisation or to become one. We are also we also are revenue generating, and so we're kind of part funded, part not. But what's really great about our position is that because we work so closely with all sorts of organisations of all different types, sizes, as mentioned at the beginning, it really does give us genuinely an insight into literally day-to-day challenges that people are having, and that hopefully, what the plan is, that we can then really help and work alongside the Arts Council to kind of devise programmes and ideas to support. I mean, the whole point, right, is to support the sector. And I think, in terms of digital, the field is wide open. There's so many areas of interest. There are so many opportunities, but there are also, as we all know, some significant challenges. So, yeah, it's interesting times ahead, I think.
Thank you. More questions from the floor?
Hi, Ghislaine Boddington from Body Data Space. I think we're one of the groups that have, in the 146 that have filled this in every year, and we're definitely involved in the initial discussion about this MTM research. So it's very interesting to see these results come through. But as in a group that is involved in creation and R&D in the digital side, from the creation side, I echo some of the panels saying it's very sad to see that that side has not come up and been increased, particularly because it relates so strongly to younger audiences. And I was just wondering, as I'm sitting here, how much this may have been influenced, and I wonder what the panel feel, by the funding strategies around digital. Over 100 pioneers were cut in the mid-2000s, of the digital pioneers, theatre, visual arts, etc., those coming from the 90s, prior to this MTM research, and whether this risk adverseness is coming from the funding strategies and policy side, because it seems that we have a kind of directed risk adverseness to creation and experimentation points.
Well, I've got the microphone, so I'll answer first. I mean, I think I am answering from a purely kind of subjective point of view. These are my views, I should say. And I mean, I'm not sure I would agree with that. I mean, I don't know, but I think actually a lot of the fear of experimentation is actually, again, it comes back to a more kind of, it's down to a number of different things, some of which are very practical, which is I don't have time to be experimental and to be innovative because I've got 40 shows to try and promote it over 2 months, or I've got 5 exhibitions coming in, and I just need to kind of crack on with the basic stuff. I think there is some of that, and I think also with digital, and I don't believe this is to do with a generational thing. I think it's just a personality thing, actually. I think with digital, there are certainly individuals who feel sort of intimidated by it. Oh, I'm not techie, that's not my thing. And I think that can put people off because they feel as though they need to know everything before they start. So I don't think that's so much a funding thing. I think that's just a mindset thing, which comes back to, though, the importance of kind of within an organisation of kind of trying to develop this digital mindset, whatever you want to call that, innovative approach, agile thinking. I know agile's a specific thing, but you know what I mean, that kind of that where it's okay to kind of, what did Google say, fail fast or whatever it is, that kind of thing. So I think the reasons are probably more that than funding, but that's just my opinion.
Well, I'd certainly want to put the room right that there's no strategy or policy at the Arts Council to not fund innovators. Indeed, the vast majority of our staff are always keen to kind of do that. I mean, I can't talk about individuals who or organisations who do or don't get funding, but I certainly think that we're absolutely open for business for funding innovative practice in this area. It's true to say that with the help of Mr. Jeremy Hunt, back a round or two ago when we had quite a lot less money, it was very difficult to make things balance. I think there are always things we can do to improve our funding mechanisms, and we're constantly thinking about whether Grants for the Arts is absolutely fit for purpose to fund new and interesting ways of creating art. And there will be a change to Grants for the Arts for the next round. We're always reviewing it and thinking how to make it better. But I certainly don't think we have any closed door for that. And I think things we've done and will do will show that in this area of kind of digital creation.
So going back to that point about digital and a digital champion, Francis talked about boards. Maybe is it an idea to have a digital champion on a board? And we also talked about, is it going to be, Francis and I had a brief conversation beforehand thinking, will this survey even be meaningful in 20 years' time? Because will digital just be an absolute cornerstone of how you do your business, and to differentiate it will not make any sense. 2 of you have digital in your job title. But we've all agreed, I think, that digital needs to be something, a mindset that permeates the whole organisation. Is that a helpful way of kind of getting the ball rolling within an organisation to have a digital point person, to have a digital department?
Yes, I would say it is. I'm bound to say that. But I think we're sort of at this... I don't think we're necessarily all ready to have a completely... distributed, dispersed, embedded model just yet, if I'm honest. And I think those who might claim they have that and haven't gone through the process where they've had a very strong central core might not really be embracing digital to its full effect. They might be seeing it purely as a sort of marketing channels and opportunities rather than as part of sort of business transformation. So I think we're all going through that cycle. We won't have job titles like heads of digital for much longer, but it's still a little while yet. Whether we should have chief digital officers, the sort of one person who knows it all, no, absolutely not. It's incumbent on all of us to be digital, to use digital, to be innovative through digital means.
Thank you.
It's also interesting, actually. I was thinking about this in relation to the report, as kind of what the definition of digital even is, which I know probably takes us off down a a whole over the route, but kind of because there's lots of talk about data in this and kind of data to understand audiences. So I'm assuming online/digital audiences. But yeah, I mean, even obviously the kind of definition of the word digital is sort of slightly changing anyway. So that is a strange one. I thought you were going to say we were not going to have jobs, and we're not going to have digital jobs. No, I completely agree with that. By the way, I think that having a digital champion, perhaps particularly for certain types of organisations, is at this point probably quite useful and important. But part of that role, I think, is to try and kind of engage and get everybody on site. I mean, it's just to kind of start those fires and so on and get people interested and talking about it. People who might think, oh, digital's nothing to do with me, it's not my job, but actually, will have lots to kind of contribute to it. So, yeah.
Any more from the floor?
Just a quick one. Anna, thank you so much for introducing me to Marta Phi, which my ignorance, I've never heard of it. After 20 minutes using the Wi-Fi here, I've successfully downloaded it, so I can't wait.
Great.
Just really quick response to what Francis said earlier about online ticketing. Of course, there's a place for it. And you're wondering, who are these people who refuse to go and buy tickets online? I, for one, am one. I go to the prompts, I just don't. I take real issue with organizations charging transaction booking fees. And 7 years ago, when I was a Claw Fellow, I got commissioned by Nesta to write a piece of research paper to look at innovative business models in the arts and culture sector. I championed 8 organizations, one of which is King's Place. And I still do. They are the only organization I'm aware of that gives you £2 off when you book online. That makes sense because you're not taking up people's time. If you're booking on the telephone and turn in person, you are taking up valuable human time. So the only place that makes sense is actually you offer a discount instead of charging transaction booking fee. I just don't get it. So I, for one, refuse to pay that wherever possible. But I'm a dinosaur, as much as I actually work virtually all the time.
Hi, thank you. Matthew Jays of Birkbeck, University of London. Just a kind of quick question for the panel about the importance of internationalisation and digital, which doesn't seem to have necessarily come up in the report. Forgive me because I've not seen the full report. How important is digital for internationalisation, thinking perhaps beyond purely live streaming and online audiences?
I'll just start. So we're not based, we're not just working in the UK. We work with organisations like the Smithsonian Museums, Venice Museums, and the goal is basically that if people start building up their artwork collections in those places, they're kind of, when they arrive in London, they're then prompted to say, oh, you've scanned Turner's, you're near the Tate, go there. So we're trying to build this kind of broader audience for museums, particularly because people are travelling everywhere. We don't sort of stay in our neighbourhoods, and we can share audiences. So for us, it's really important international work.
Depends what you mean by internationalisation. If you're talking specifically about foreign language provision, which when you've got several thousand pages of a website and loads of social media activity going on, that is quite a big task for us to consider and really target where best our resource would be spent on sort of providing that. But if you're talking more broadly about international audiences, 50% of our audiences are international, certainly digital audiences. And we're really mindful of the fact that not all of them are going to be coming to visit the V&A. So we think very carefully about what sort of content and experiences we create for those international audiences, because it's not all about driving people to a museum for ticket sales, for membership, etc. It's a bit bigger than that, and it's much more about engagement and sharing our knowledge.
I mean, I think for the Arts Council, it's important both ways. So there's the bit about exporting, so which is a kind of key part of kind of soft power and things like that. Exporting our art, our creative industries is something the government's keen on. You've seen that in things like the translation of Shakespeare into Chinese that the RSC was involved in. And then it's important the other way, because such a lot of inbound tourism, whilst people don't necessarily say their first reason for coming here is culture, it's often part of the visit. You go to any kind of arts event in London and you really feel that sense of the international audience. I think one of the challenges is, and you alluded to this, is how much is that about monetizing or not, and how much is it about your public sector sort of duty? And that's quite tricky, I think, is to get that balance right, because you do actually want them to pay something or make a contribution, but equally it's not just about gulling them, I think.
I'd like to follow that excellent question from our colleague from London University up. There's a great connection between internationalism. I'm John Pratty, by the way, from Sussex University. There's a great connection between the international question and the point that Richard made from the report about the smaller number of formats, the smaller number of digital formats that we're seeing. I think we're talking here about maturity of digital types. And if we are looking to invest, say, 50k or 100k or 200k in a digital product or project, we want that to have a life cycle which is going to give us time to market it around the world, or market it as a data feed, or market it. So it seems to me that there are a reduction of number of types of digital because we're seeing a maturation. We're seeing more mature digital formats that we want to last longer. It seems to me also that the increase in engagement that we're seeing in the report is because people are using simpler digital formats. Small organisations use social a lot. They're not investing in apps. The number of apps that are being constructed by arts organisations are absolutely falling because we're seeing apps having a tiny life cycle. Internationally, if you want to share data or be part of the international data market, you need formats that are going to last for 5 years or whatever. So this is a question to the panel, really. Are we, as a sector, creating digital formats that really have a long enough life cycle for people like Anna and Smartify to build a business model upon? I suspect that we're not, but what does the panel think?
Although we're not part of Smartify, we would have the ability to do so. We've had an API of our collections data since 2008. We were one of the first, I think, museums to do so. So yes, in terms of having the ability to do that, yes, we have done, and we do and have done for nearly a decade. And in terms of other content formats, yes, I think we're working out what works and what doesn't, and we use, that's why the data question is so important. We use the data to analyse what works and what doesn't, and it's interesting just how long the shelf life is for certain types of content that we produced. One of our most favourite articles is about England and sex. No surprises there as to why it's always so popular. But, we've got some, video formats and all kinds of things that do stand the test of time, but we will still experiment. It's still really important to experiment on new formats. So I think, unfortunately, one needs to do both, to stick with the mature formats and experiment in the new.
It's just a really quick observation about that internationalisation comment. The 30% of organisations who are doing R&D, within that group, there's some really fascinating internationalisation stories. Arts Council England and Nesta funded an innovation programme, which this study is related to. When you look at some of those organisations, some of them are selling their apps internationally, or trying to. Lots of them are buying content internationally. or even thinking about selling content internationally, and a whole range of other things besides. Our report only touches on the very, very surface of that, but there's a whole range of interesting stories underneath it that come out of this programme.
Okay, we're going to close there. Thank you very much. Really, all I want to say is huge thank yous to Arts Council, who are our partner, our funding partner and our research partner in this, to Rich and everyone at MTM who have done this incredible job of getting hold of and then taming this enormous data set and pulling it together into something meaningful that I hope you will all read and tell us what you think of. To Paul at the Arts Council and Sam at Nesta, who've done an incredible amount of work as well, and pulling the reports and the fact sheets together. To Hasan, obviously, whose brainchild this was. So I hope you all have a nice evening. Do come up and ask us all questions and stay for drinks. Thank you very much for coming.